Hey everyone, welcome to Comrades Diaries number 10. We have no B2 this week, but I'm really excited to welcome our guest today, Tristan Miller.
Thanks, Hilton.
Tristan shot to fame when he ran 52 marathons in 52 weeks, and he published a book off the back of that called Run Like Crazy, which we'll hear a bit more about today. And then I know since then, yeah, there it is. Great read. We'll talk a lot about that. But since then, I know, Tristan, you've done plenty of other challenges. You've established your Run Like Crazy community, and probably most importantly, you have a beautiful and flourishing family as well, probably since those days of Run Like Crazy. And Tristan's a regular speaker at events, and I know he's still passionate about his running as he was in those early days. So Tristan, thank you so much for joining us today. And you're our first guest on Running High podcast, so very honored to have you.
Oh, you hadn't told me that. I'm your first guest, Hilton. That's very kind for you to invite me along. I appreciate and respect that you've called a friend to come on and jump on your first guest.
Yeah, no, Tristan, if you maybe just indulge me for a minute, I'll just tell everyone how I actually met you, and then we'll spend more time, delving into your story.
Absolutely.
So it actually probably takes me back about 10 years ago when I was sort of first getting into running, and I took on my sort of first big challenge, being the New York Marathon. And as part of that, I was running for the Heart Foundation, and I needed to do a fundraiser. And at the same time, someone had actually kindly given me your book, Run Like Crazy, which I pretty much read in a day. And it was just incredibly inspirational to me. I was going through some changes in my life as well, and I just loved reading about your story. So just out of the blue, I thought I'll just give Tristan a call and see if he'll come and talk at my running event, which we had a quick chat on the phone. You were just incredibly gracious and giving of your time. You came and chatted at my event. I still have people, non-runners actually, say to me today, hey, how's that guy Tristan going? He was so inspirational. Just everyone just actually remembers that event. So that was the start of it. Over the years, I've seen you off and on, but as you know, I'm taking on my next big challenge in the Comrades, and you're still an inspiration to me. So as I said, thanks for coming on today.
Oh, and thank you, Hilton. Look, to be honest, you made it easy for me. You did an event just down the road from where I live. So it's easy for me to come along and, participate and support you. And I love that people take on these challenges, constantly take on these challenges, which over time start to become harder and bigger for themselves. And I feel lucky that I've sort of paved that path for myself. Like I've, gone through those different stages, and everyone's like, this marathon's going to be huge. It's really difficult. I'm not sure if I'll be able to make it. And I'm like, of course you'll be able to make it, but I get it. It's scary, And then the next one, they're like, okay, I did that, but now I'm doing a big international run. It's going to be completely different. I'm like, I mean, it's not really. It's just bigger, crazier. And now you start talking about taking on ultra distances. I'm like, okay, actually, that's kind of difficult, but it's really fun and awesome. And I've done Comrades twice myself, so that's probably got some of my best running memories attached to that.
Okay, we'll definitely talk a bit about that, Tristan, as we get into it. Actually, one thing that you said to me, you probably won't even remember it, when I called you that first time. I said to you, I'm running New York because I'm only ever running one marathon, and I just want to tick a big one. And you sort of almost just nodded wisely as if, yeah, we'll see about that.
Yeah, sure. Just one, and just New York. Okay.
Anyway, Tristan, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into running, and then we'll talk a little bit about 52 marathons as well.
Yeah, happy to. So, look, mine's not a new story, and I'm not even saying that just for myself. It's actually a pretty common story. I had a big relationship breakup at 28 years old. Girl I met when I was 18. We got married at 24. We had 2 good years and 2 kind of not fun at all years. And then we were divorced at 28. which was a real shock to me. Didn't think my life was going to play out that way. Very weirdly, it was a little too close to the experience that my father had had too. And I kept reflecting on it, going, how did I end up just making the same mistakes?
Yeah.
Except the difference being my father had four children, and he divorced when he was about 32-ish, 33. And he had a lot of, I guess, incumbent kind of, I'm going to call it baggage. I'm not baggage, but that's just life stuff that goes with that relationship breakdown. And so there wasn't, he had a lot more to carry moving forward. What I didn't have as a result of that was anything to turn to. Like, I just ended up getting drunk all the time for probably, the best part of a year at least. I was working in bars and nightclubs because my mates owned and ran bars and nightclubs. I was kind of working during the day in a regular job, but I wasn't very present. I wasn't a very good person. I don't think I was a good person at the end of my relationship. I don't think I was a good person in that year that followed that relationship breakdown. I think I was just lost. I really didn't know how to tackle it. But just, fortuitously, I had a guy that I was working with called Rob Gilbert, and Rob Gilbert was a runner and he loved running, and he had all this stuff going on in his life, big work pressures, home life stuff that was really difficult to navigate because he had a son with cerebral palsy. And so lots of things that he had to digest and think about all the time. And he's like, and his process for that was to go running. And, meditation, resolution, all the stuff that we talk about is the value of running is something that he dealt with and utilized on a regular basis as just part of his toolkit to get by, And I just didn't have a toolkit. I was like, get drunk, have a hangover, get better, go out, try dating, not very good at it. Do you know what I mean? Like all of that kind of stuff, like better at getting drunk than dating. And so like it just wasn't in a good place. And so he reached out to me and spoke to me about it a few times and then encouraged me to get out for a run with him, which was a huge shock to me to go running. I covered all of 8 kilometers, which, I ran 15 this morning without thinking about it, but 8 then was just a big deal.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, like running's a thing. I felt better. And, not to say that was a really easy journey straight into running. Like I did all the, standard stuff. I probably ran too much at the start and got plantar fasciitis and all that kind of stuff. And I had to adjust my weight and my thinking and my diet and all of those things. But, long story short, within a year, I was doing my first marathon, which was the Melbourne Marathon. And when I did the Melbourne Marathon, I honestly thought that was a space that I would never live, like that.
Yeah.
Who runs 42 kilometers? I mean, I didn't even know that thousands of people did it every year, let alone, just in Melbourne, let alone the rest of the world. But for me, it was like, oh, okay, there's a whole culture here that I'm just not aware of, where people take care of themselves, look after themselves, and step up and step into the right direction. So that's where it started for me, let alone all the things that followed.
Yeah, well, that's as you said. I mean, it's a great personal story, but I think something that resonates with me because, I mean, I was going through other things in my life when I found running, but I'm interested to know, Tristan, when you sort of found running in that way, was it like someone flicked a switch and you automatically just said, wow, this is a whole nother world? Or did it take you a little while to sort of get into it and really, get the value out of it in that way?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be wrong of me to say I hadn't run since, in 10 years before I met Rob. Like I didn't run much. And when I did run, I was probably running for 2 or 3 kilometers, which everyone knows just isn't very far. And so even when he encouraged me, I don't think it just took off. It's easier to kind of compact time and say, I just got it within, months or minutes or whatever. The reality is, I kept trying to do both, like live that life of, being free and single and going out, drinking and dancing, and I'll fit some runs in around it. But it started to be really obvious that it was just, I was trying to live a double life and I wasn't that happy with the drunken version of me, but I was supremely happy with the fit, happy, kind of outgoing version of me. And so that took me a while to kind of resolve that it was okay to like leave my old self behind and become something new. And you know, like we all have different pressures in life, work pressures, social pressures, family commitments, all that kind of stuff. But like what I think about fitness and training and looking after yourself and all that kind of stuff, it's a very selfish thing to do, but it's good selfish. Like there's nothing wrong with taking a few things in your life and making it all about you so that you're a better human, so that you kind of have self-confidence, self-worth, all of those things. And you can redirect that into the rest of your life, because the alternative is the bad selfish stuff where you go and get drunk and you gamble and you run away from things and you kind of hide under various rocks. And that's not adding any self-worth to you. And therefore, you're not a better person to be around for anyone else that then you spend time with. And so for me, that was a really big balance point that I had to figure out.
Yeah, spot on. It's sort of like that old saying, you know, you can't look after anyone else if you don't look after yourself first.
Yeah.
And the other thing I've found, it's sort of almost like becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling thing as you focus more on your own health and your own fitness and sort of well-being. The other things like, you know, drinking too much or whatever it might be, you just don't want to do them anymore. It sort of just naturally almost falls away. That's what I've found. Not that I don't still enjoy a few beers here and there, but anyway, why don't we fast forward a little bit, Tristan? I'm not sure what the time gap was between doing that first Melbourne Marathon and then you taking on this massively audacious goal of running 52 marathons in 52 weeks. But tell us a little bit about how and why you took on that.
Yeah. And look, you know, for a few years, I did a marathon a year and I did other fun run events and all that kind of stuff. And as you do, you know, that's what I'm into. And I was really happy to just participate in social events. But then I joined a triathlon group called Tribal. And I didn't really do triathlons, but I had some friends that were, you know, they're training with this team. And it was like another lifestyle choice thing. They were training all the time, whereas I was kind of training intermittently. My first few marathons, I convinced a couple of my high school mates to come do all the training with me and got them into it as well. And, you know, I was sort of trying to sell it to other people. But then when I joined this triathlon group that had a whole bunch of people that were actually just runners as well, I found that I wasn't trying to convince anyone anything. They were all like, you know, deep in training, like all the time, talking about it, you know, comparing notes, all that kind of stuff. And so it made me level up really, really quickly. When I thought I was quite a good runner, and I met these guys, I was running very much at the back of the pack. And so each week it was really fun for me to catch up with someone and overtake them and get a little bit better and kind of test myself out. And as a result of that, I started to kind of take on larger challenges. And so by the time 2009 came around, and Melbourne Marathon #1 was 2005 for me. And then by the time I got to 2009, there's a big shake up in the world, you know, with the GFC that had sort of been going for a year or so by then. I was working at Google. So prior to that, I'd been working at 3AW, radio station, kind of boring, working at Google, big globally focused kind of business, doing lots of interesting things. And I decided to take on a global challenge, you know, because I wanted to travel more and do more and all that kind of stuff. And so I decided to take on Comrades for the first time. And so I convinced, once again, I sold the idea of going to Comrades with a bunch of my mates. And we all started sort of training together and everything was going really, really well across summer 2008 into 2009. And just as we were sort of coming to the end of our training block, the GFC was, you know, going pretty wild. And Google actually shut the Melbourne office, shut a bunch of satellite offices around the world. And with Melbourne shut, everyone lost their job. I had a payout. It was a bit of a shake-up for me. But I'd sort of went, you know, I didn't know how to react to it. I was really disappointed, but also a little bit trying to be sort of pragmatic about it, thinking, how is this going to affect me moving forward? Am I just going to take a job to just get a job so I've got a job? Or, you know, am I going to go backwards here or find a way to go forwards and flourish? based on my new sort of marathon training mentality, anything was possible. I'm going to go and do an ultra marathon in South Africa. So right now, my brain is absolutely open to wild ideas, you know. And so I toyed around with starting a little agency or taking on a role in a different business and a few other things. And what I decided to do was to just go to Africa and do this race. And if I go to Africa, do the race, I can have some time away from all the pressures of me to getting a job and paying my mortgage and all that kind of stuff. And I went and had an amazing time, you know, which we can talk a little bit about later. But my resolution at the end of that was international running is the most fun thing I could possibly do. It was just insanely exciting, and everyone was so engaging throughout the race, and people were like cheering for you, and people like strangers in the streets in Durban or, you know, up on the kind of beaches near there were just clapping for us just after the race, 2 days after the race. What are you here for? You ran Comrades. That's amazing. Your time's incredible. I wanted more of that. And so I spent the next week or so traveling around, you know, with my mates in Africa and seeing, you know, they're going to Botswana and all that sort of stuff. And I'd been talking about it for a little while. And, you know, it's never one moment that just makes you decide on these big adventures. It's always a culmination of ideas. But I'd said to my friends, what if I took a year off and just went and saw the world, but not just the world through travel, because it's easy and a backpacker is something you do when you're 20, not when you're 33, you know, at that stage. What if it was time to just go and see new things? And they were like, that sounds amazing, but you won't do that because you're going to go home and get a new job. And I'm like, yeah, maybe. And then, you know, while I'm walking around looking at lions, elephants and all that kind of stuff, I'm like, it's a big world out there and I'm not seeing it. So, you know, it's my turn. And so I came back with this idea. And the idea was to run a marathon in a week in a different country every week, always an official marathon, and do it for an entire year. So I've time boxed it to 1 year. I'm going to go away. And if I get through a month, amazing. If I get through 3 to 6 months, incredible. If I got the whole year done, that would be unbelievable, like just probably impossible. But if I could do every different place that I want to, all the major marathons in the world, all the really interesting marathons in the world, if I could get myself to Antarctica and even do the marathon down there, like that's like just an unbeatable prospect. That's the world's greatest adventure. And so if I could have the world's greatest adventure, what's that worth to me?
Yeah.
And that basically turned out to be worth everything. Like I was happy to just go, well, no matter what anyone says to me, I've decided that's what's going to happen. And so there were a lot of people saying it's not possible. There was a lot of, you know, little voices in me going, you're crazy, you're going to lose everything. This isn't going to work out. I couldn't get sponsorship because it was a global economic crisis. So, you know, no one was giving money to some random guy that wants to run around the world. I pegged myself against raising money for UNICEF because I thought it was the right thing to do, like education for children in third world countries, all that kind of stuff. And then, you know, I decided to go and do it. I sold my apartment in St Kilda. I raised kind of 100 grand and just went, okay, it's time to go.
Massive step, but really interesting I didn't actually realize, Tristan, it actually started when you were in South Africa with the Comrades, the seed of the idea. So that would be nice.
The idea was bubbling away before that. It's just really kicked in when I had that international race. I'm like, I'm doing this. I love this. You know?
Amazing. And I mean, I know, as you know, we don't obviously have time to go through all the 52 marathons, but as you said, I've read the book, and the thing that really just was amazing to me was, you know, it's a bit like a travel book. It's a running book, obviously, but it's a bit like a travel book. Just the logistics of, you know, getting across. I remember actually when you did the talk at my fundraiser, how you had the globe of the world up on a slide and just the lines going from country to continent, like, you know, just some crazy flights and sort of things that you did. Was there anything in particular? I mean, I'd love to just to touch on a few races, but anything in particular that really stands out for you? And we'll talk a bit about Comrades maybe as we come to the close, but anything that really stands out for you in that sort of 52 marathons?
Yeah, tons. I mean, look, the reality is, like, I don't know, I have a very reflective nature. So, like, for me, you know, when I was doing all these different things, I had a friend with me for the first few months, And so we were sharing all these adventures and seeing all this cool stuff. But then, to be honest, he got a bit sick of it all. It was a bit too much. And so he wanted to just stop the travel. And I understood, because it was my adventure, my selfish adventure, that was about me achieving something amazing. And it wasn't really, his bag. Um, when I was by myself, I was then really insanely absorbed in each of the moments that happened around me, and I can very easily, recall and reflect on like really fine moments, conversations,
Right.
places, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I just tried to be really, really present in every situation that I was on, which is really hard when you're running really, like quite a long way each week, and then you've got to recover from that. But as I've been, told subsequently, like all the chemicals like endorphins and testosterone and serotonin and all that kind of stuff, it all magnifies all those kind of moments as well. And so all of that allowed it to really be embedded in my mind. But the places that that got to me, that really connected to me, was going back to South Africa. So I did the Two Oceans Marathon, which is a very famous race and the standard lead up to doing to doing Comrades. But then going to places like Israel, like I always wanted to know what those spaces were like. I was a little bit afraid of going there, if I'm honest. But I wanted to go and see it. And I was very much embraced and engaged by the local running community. And that was for me, like I'd sort of flew over, went to Switzerland. Of course, there's a running community there. It's Europe. There's runners,
Yeah. Yeah.
Then went to Israel. It's actually a really big running community, and they have this famous race every year, and it's fantastic, And I got to go to Jerusalem and places like that, and all of a sudden have these epic historic experiences as well in spaces that I wondered if I'd ever get there. And then I went to Mumbai, which was completely different and shocking. And then Dubai, and I met Haile Gebrselassie, who is the
Wow.
world champion
Yeah.
of
I
world record.
remember that in the book. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so moments like that all of a sudden became these weekly, like life-changing events for me. Normally were happening on a weekly basis. And so going to those places was really quite stunning to me. But probably the other places I really got I fell in love with, if you will, was going to Mongolia, because it's a very far-flung place to get to and it's hard to get to. And I was staying in like a yurt kind of thing set up, and then going to St. Petersburg and places like that, which Russia kind of, I was confused about Russia as to whether I should love and respect the Russians or be fearful of them and all that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
I know people's experiences right now would change the thought process about what Russia as a place is like. But for me, I went there and had the most incredible experience in St. Petersburg, and went to the Hermitage, and it was just absolutely beautiful. And went down to Moscow, and the buildings are incredible, and the people are a little bit kind of cold when you start speaking to them, but when you get to know them, are actually super friendly, and they just kind of have this natural front on them. And so, I'm sort of having those sorts of experiences where I had to take the time to chip away at the locals and get to know people. And what I was really lucky to have with this story, because anytime people who heard about what I was doing, they were like, I mean, that's insane. What you're doing is not normal. It's crazy. But, but they want to hear more.
Hence the name Run Like Crazy.
Yeah, but they want to hear more, but then they want to help you. They're
Yeah.
like, what could we do to make sure your experience in our country surpasses the experiences you have in any other? And so, I was kind of being carried along by these people that wanted to sort of give generously and make sure I enjoyed myself.
Yeah.
But there were the few of those sort of unexpected highlights, and
Yeah.
there's many others.
Yeah. Wow. No, that's amazing. I'm interested also just in, I think most people listening to this will probably have run a marathon. I've the longest I've ever done is actually Two Oceans, which is 56. That nearly killed me, Tristan. So we'll see how Comrades goes. But I mean, doing that every week, it's just almost, it's hard to comprehend in terms of, the recovery,
Yeah.
the impact on your body. So I'm just interested in, what was your routine like? I mean, did you even do training runs in between? Did you pick up injuries? How did you manage all of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the runners that you're speaking to, you'd have the full range of people, listening to your show. And you'll have people that run 20, 30 Ks a week, and that's plenty for them, and they're happy with that distance. And you'll have people that run 130 kilometers a week, and that's because they're inspired to do so because they've got a big event coming up, or they just like running, and that's a thing as well. And so prior to going off and doing these runs to train to do Comrades, I was easily doing 120 Ks a week, like regularly. And so by the time I'd sort of, had half a year off serious running, I went to do the Melbourne Marathon. I got injured. I got an adductor injury, like just a strain, and I couldn't shake it too. Even going into the start of that year of running around the world, I was basically injured. But I kind of went, okay, I've just got to ease my way into this and into this process. And if I can train, I'll train. And if I could just run the marathons, well, I'll just run the marathons. So at the bare minimum, I'd be running 42 Ks a week. But there was a couple of times where I did like back-to-back marathons. So a marathon on a Saturday and another one on a Sunday in a different country.
That's crazy. Yeah.
I know, but it gave me the space to then go to the further places to get to, Lake Hobsgol in Mongolia, which is really hard to reach, and that was going to be a 10-day block. I'd considered trying to go to Everest to do the base camp marathon along with all these other ones, but I needed probably 3 weeks for that. So I'd have to condense too many other marathons to make that happen. As it happened, they actually cancelled it that year because I was sort of semi-signed up for it. I paid a deposit and was hoping for the best. But yeah, so I ended up trying to do, well, what I found was my recovery was probably the thing that dictated that experience. So if I ran a marathon on a Sunday, then I could then recover enough on Monday to then travel and get to the next place. And I'd work out where the local track was, so I had a really obvious course to run around. And I'd try to sort of run there, find it, get towards it or around it, or a nice running path in any city. And I'd always sort of see my Tuesday run as my test run. Like if I've got an injury or a perceived injury, is it going to emerge to be worse? Or if I can knock out a few Ks, is my body going to settle and find a rhythm and get going again? And we all have these little ghost injuries, right? Something you're like, my calf's definitely going to pop. My knee's not feeling great. My foot's been kind of a bit funny lately. I'm not sure if my ankle's going to handle the distances. But then you start running and your body warms up, and then everything seems to sort of fall back into its normal rhythm again. And that's, for me, the thing that needed to happen on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And then because I knew where the track was, I'd go and find it on Thursday. I'd do a track session. And I'd do a track session to try to speed up, because I didn't want to spend that whole year getting slower and more beat up. I actually wanted to work on getting faster, so that I had this personal challenge of being an improved runner by the end of the year, not just a runner that would just knock out the Ks.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I mean, obviously, just the completion of the 52 marathons is a massive achievement in itself. But you are also obviously focusing on improving as a runner. And I recall from reading the book, there were a few runs there where you did get quite focused on your times and wanting to break various milestones, etc.
Yeah, and I hadn't really thought that through too much at the start of the year. But when I met Haile Gebrselassie in, January, and he's like, well, I mean, you're magic. If you can do that at all, you're magic. But all I could think was, this guy is so incredibly fast. And that in that marathon, I ran, the first half, and it's Dubai, right? So it's like ridiculously hot already. They start the race at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. You run up, sort of one way, and you turn around. And I barely got through 13, 14 kilometers before Haile was flying the other way, right? And I'm like, mate, how good's this guy? And all of a sudden, the second half of that race, I went a lot faster. Like, I was just inspired by the vision of the world champion, going for broke. And he missed the world record by like a minute, but I just thought it was so awesome. And then I'm like, wow, I actually did a negative split, and that was my 4th marathon of the year in my first month. And then I'm like, you know what? Like, I could get better. I can be better. I'm running 3:20 pace-ish to 3:30 pace. There's a big gap, down to 3 hours. I'm going to chip away at that. And so every 3rd or 4th marathon, I try to chip away at that time and do more. And so I guess my routine ended up being that. It was like a flow of, am I injured? Not really. Can I go a bit quicker in a training session? Yes. Don't spend too many cookies because you're going to need them on the weekend. Go and run that race on the weekend. Within 5Ks, I'd make a decision if this was going to be a good day or a bad day.
Right. Yeah.
Because temperature, the way I was feeling, if I wasn't too fatigued, if I could find a rhythm and get moving. And then my average time came down pretty quickly, whereas most of my marathons are around the 3:20 mark. And I did some mountain marathons that were 5.5 hours. I ended up doing a couple of 100K races because I just wanted to see what would happen if I could do 100Ks in Mongolia or 100Ks over in, sort of.
I remember thinking, as if 52 marathons were not enough, you threw in a few of those real ultra marathons in there as well.
Yeah, well, if you're running all the time, you're like, well, So in the end, when I did like a couple of those marathons with an ultra and all that kind of stuff, there were a couple of weeks where I did 180 Ks in a week. And you're like, that's unnecessary. And people were messaging me going, dude, like, if you want to make it, you don't throw in those random races. But I really just want to see what would happen.
So this is probably a hard question for you to answer, Tristan, because I mean, as you said, every marathon is probably special in its own right. But if you had to single out just one, what would be sort of the most special or sort of meaningful marathon that you did? Can you single out one, or is it just too hard?
It is hard because so many different things happen that year. I don't, I met so many incredibly interesting people throughout my time and people that I've stayed in touch with around the world since then. So as I said to you at the time, and I know this because it's basically the response that I normally give, New York Marathon was the most exciting marathon I did that year. And that was for a whole bunch of reasons. Like my mum and my sister had come over to see me. Really funnily, like I was coming up towards Central Park towards the end of the race, and I was running there, and I could see my sister on the side of the path, and I run up, and I'm like, "Hey, sis, high five! I've got like less than 10 kilometers to go, and I'm gonna get there. Where's mum?" And mum was off chatting up some bloke over on the side of the path, and I'm like, "Mum, you've come all this way to see me running my marathon." She's like, "Oh, sorry, I'll just wait there, sir." Came up. Well done, love. Keep going, And yet I had a whole bunch of mates that were there at the same time, and we had all these kind of really fun party moments, and people were really celebrating for me as though I'd already finished.
Because that would have been towards the end of your 52, wouldn't it?
Start of November, right? So like still 2 months to go. Still hadn't got to Antarctica. Still had some kind of hairy moments where a race got cancelled in Costa Rica and stuff like that. Things that could have made it all fall apart. But it all just seemed to work out. I'd say that specific race was one that I just had it had all the elements. And I reckon most people go over there and have a similar experience because it feels like all the elements are just at your fingertips in New York,
Yeah. No, I know I haven't run nearly as many as you, but it's still to this day is probably the most special, and probably also because it was my first. But it is a magnificent event.
And I've done all the majors, and it still sits as my sort of top major, and Berlin being my second favorite of the majors. Because it was just an epic race. I felt like I was racing, and I did it my fastest time that year at Berlin. And Haile Gebrselassie was there again, and I did a 3:03, and I think he did a 2:03. So,
and since then, I mean, I think you went sub 3 in that 52 weeks, and I know you've done plenty of sub 3 since, Tristan. So
I didn't go sub 3 that year.
Didn't you? You got close.
Years later. And here's a little tidbit for everyone, and not that many people know this. It was about my 73rd marathon where I did sub 3.
Wow.
73rd marathon. A lot of people are trying to do it in their first few marathons. They're trying to go under 3 hours. It took me years.
That's fascinating. Well,
running smarter to get there.
I'm a little older than you, Tristan. I won't be doing 73, and therefore I won't be going sub 3. Hey, I
Yeah.
wanted to just ask you a little bit about Comrades. You talked about it earlier. I know I think you've done two, right?
Yeah, I've done two. I did one in 2017 for my 40th birthday.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about Comrades, ups or downs or one of each, and just how you found that whole race.
Yeah, well, I would say Comrades is, you say, what's my favorite race in that year running around the world? New York. It's an easy answer, as I said, because of all those reasons. But I'd heard about Comrades from some other friends. A guy called Tory Truitt. He used to do a lot of personal training in Melbourne. I think he lives in Byron Bay or something these days. He wrote a blog, and he shared it with a friend of mine who was working at 3AW at the time. And she shared it with me because she knew I'd taken an interest in running. And when I read it, it was just the coolest story of this guy's adventure going to Africa and running this
Yeah.
epic, historic race. And I'm like, wow, that is on my bucket list for sure. So when I got to be there, I think the thing that stands out the most is I got to do it with friends, a couple of guys that had South African heritage, and they took me to their sort of family homes and all that kind of stuff. And we had such a good time together as a team, as a group. And, we had a couple of the girls that were there, and they had so much nerves. Do you know what I mean? Leading
Yeah.
into the
Yeah.
race. Like one girl was throwing up the night before. And I'm busy looking for the next tequila shot just to kind of stop myself. And I was so excited to get there at that start line because the vibrancy, the singing of the national anthem and the Zulu kind of, the songs that they it was
Yeah.
just people were crying at the start of the race, like tears, in
Yeah.
their eyes as they were singing along with all their friends. And it really felt like a moment for me. And I'm like, I didn't even know racing could be like this,
Yeah.
like I didn't even think stuff like this happened. And let alone the journey that people go on just to get to that start line, and then the journey of actually running that race. Because, a marathon's 3, 4, maybe 5 hours of running, 5 hours, you'd be lucky if you're halfway.
Yeah.
And that was my experience, was like, wow, this is like
And
hard.
it's very up and down, right? Whether you're running up run or down run, it's very
Yep.
up and down. Yeah.
So the down's harder. I can now, say that, qualify that. Up is difficult, but because you're running up, you tend to kind of just push into the hill and push yourself up and over it. And it can really cook your legs. But those downhill runs, once you've done like enough distance, every downhill feels like it's just going to break something in the lower half of your leg, like something feels like it's going to snap. And you have to put faith in your legs that they're not going to break, that everything's going to keep moving, that you've done the training, they've earned your spot. And so all of that was really confronting to me. And I was running next to my mate, I call him Cougar, this fella Nick. We ran the first sort of 60 kilometers together, and I could feel him fading. And I'm like, what's wrong? He goes, oh, my foot's hurting, my sock's not right, I'm going to have to slow down. I'm like, mate, you are not slowing down. Do you know what I mean? Fix that sock, you're coming with me, we're going to get this done. And about 10, 15 Ks later, I'm slowing his, and I'm like, mate, I think I've lost it. And he's like, no, mate,
Yeah. And I
you're
think
coming with me.
which is amazing, because I think that's so much of the story of Comrades, right? Is
Yeah.
people obviously during that length race, you're going to have your highs and lows, but just people being there for each other and pulling each other through it. I've just heard so many
It
amazing stories
doesn't
about
feel like there's a person out there, whether they're supporters or runners, that wants you to slow down or wants you to fail.
it. Yeah.
Like everyone's like, we can do this. Like we can do this,
Yeah.
And I just, I'm getting chills talking about it because I'm
Yeah.
having so many kind of excited memories around it. And, there's lots to see along the way. There's people out cheering for you. They've got the braai out, the
Yeah.
barbecue,
Yeah.
and people are sitting there with sofas on the side of the road. And they're there every year. They're there every year. It
Yeah.
was epic. It was such a good feeling.
Yeah.
When I went back, it was a very different feeling because I was a much more kind of tenured runner. And I went and did the first one in 9 hours and 20 minutes. And the second, the uphill, I did it in just over 8.5 hours.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I wanted to go
That's
under 8 hours.
spectacular.
I thought I could get in the sevens. And I still think I can. So I'd like to go
So
back.
you've still got another one. So
Yeah.
you would own the Bill Rowan medal then, but Silver sounds like your aspiration,
It
Tristan.
is, but that's 7.5 hours. I don't know if I can get
Yeah,
it
yeah,
7.5 hours, but I'd
yeah. Wow.
I'd be willing to give it a shot.
Well, I can't wait. You scared me a little bit, but I think it's the experience as well. I've signed up. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's life affirming stuff though, Hilton. There's nothing like it. There's no race in the world that's that kind of distance that has the history of that race. Like
yeah,
it just doesn't exist. It's not
yeah,
possible.
yeah,
Not possible to just force 100 years of culture into a race.
yeah. No,
You
spot
know?
on.
Yeah.
Tristan, I was going to ask you this question in the context of run like the 52 marathons, but I guess I'll ask it to you in the context of that as well as Comrades, because people always say about Comrades, that's where you certainly get to know yourself on that race. So the question I was going to ask is just sort of a general question over the years of doing some pretty tough things and, pushing yourself pretty hard. What you've learned about yourself through running and what running actually means to you, because we've talked a bit about this over the time. It's just not about running. Running's actually becomes a way of life.
Mm. Yeah, and it still is for me. Look, to be honest, this year I've been a little bit injured. I've had some I ran the Canberra Marathon 2 weeks after having COVID, and I think I strained something in my gut, and I've never quite come good from it. So, interestingly, been cycling a little bit more than running.
Yeah,
Um, but I became obsessed with running and the feeling that it gave me that I could control something in my life. So there's a lot of elements of life that you don't have control over that are just going to happen to you in one form or another.
yeah,
And you can write out the good and the bad of that, and you're making good decisions and bad decisions that have ongoing ramifications. And it is what it is. I do believe you're generally fully in control of how your fitness is and what your goals are.
yeah,
You absolutely might get injured, and there could be dietary things that change that and lots of other things. But you can control generally your level of training and your thought process around that. So if you choose to take on a much bigger challenge, whether it's, 20Ks, 40Ks, 90Ks for Comrades, running from Perth to Bondi. Do you know what I mean? Like this Ned Brockman fella.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
you choose that. Like you've chosen to participate and take yourself into a zone that you didn't think you were ever going to be able to do. And I don't, it doesn't matter who you meet that's got a story like that. And it sounds like the most epic, incredible, impossible thing in the world. There's always someone else that's done more. Always, always, always. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like we don't even talk about what was his name? Pat Farmer, who ran from the North Pole to the South Pole. Like he's an Aussie guy that ran from the
yeah,
North Pole to the South Pole, and basically everyone's forgotten.
yeah,
Like who does that? Like who? It's so far. I know people that rode a tandem bike from Vancouver to Santiago in Chile, and I think that's insane. But at least they're on a bike. I mean, this guy
yeah,
was running the whole time and just kept going forever. And he was not a young man when he did it. He was
yeah,
older than I
wow,
am today.
yeah,
And I'm like, we create our own personal limitations, and those limitations, if we allow them to affect the lifestyle of running, of just the things that we do physically, for our fitness, for our mental health, if we create caps on that kind of personal expectation, I feel like you just automatically create caps on the rest of your life. You also don't show a very good example for your kids and the people around you. And if you want to attract better, more informed, more inspired people, then do inspiring things. Do
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
if you want more of those people around you, then go and participate in the things that they do and then do more of it too for yourself. And all of a sudden, all you talk about is things that you could do to outdo yourself and to lift a little and to try something harder and something new. And
yeah,
that way of living and way of thinking is what I love.
yeah,
About my own adventures and the things that I've tried to do. And I haven't even touched on all the ultra marathons that I sort of did after running around the world. But like, it's just, you're just in a better headspace all the time. And you should always try to stay in that better headspace. And that's really, really hard given that life gets in the way.
yeah.
You know? Kids, you need to be around for them more. You get a new job, you travel more, you do all this other stuff. And all of a sudden, you can't quite fit everything in. But if you don't carve out that time to look after yourself and do stuff that inspires you, then you're going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, no, spot on. And that's certainly what I've found out of running. I think, people experience in probably slightly different ways. But for me, as you said, it's definitely something that you control. And for me, the other word that sort of always comes to mind is freedom. There's just a certain amount of, it might be freedom that you experience when you're on a run, or it's freedom to make choices around where you're going to travel, what you're going to do. And for me, it was even freedom to realize there were some life choices that I could make that I was probably closed off to even thinking about before I started running. So yeah, no, spot on.
It's just brilliant though, and look, we all want to keep growing, right? And if you're growing emotionally, like mentally, physically, all that kind of stuff, if you're heading in the right direction, or at least trying to test yourself in a new direction, then we're always going to learn something, and you're always going to be better for it. You're not going to be worse off for learning something new. You're always going to be better off for it. And that comes in so many different forms, right? Learning something new.
Yeah.
And for me, like, I find that, with family, with, my wife and all that kind of stuff, it's kind of hard to justify going on a trip somewhere these days to go and do a run that means something to me when it doesn't really make a difference to everyone else. And if anything, you would say that I've done all the trips.
Yeah.
I've
You did them all in one year.
Yeah, I've had my share, even subsequently done all those things.
Yeah.
Do I deserve another adventure? Well, of course I do. Like, and that should never stop. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to just be talking about past Tristan, who is a very interesting person. I want to talk about continuously growing, interesting Tristan, who just will always go on an adventure if you invite him along.
And I know you're out there on Strava or, Facebook or whatever. I know you've continued to do those sorts of things post your big year. So, is there anything there, either in terms of what you've done or what you're planning to do that's worth sharing, Tristan?
Oh, look, I'd love to do a Comrades again. I did do I did a half Ironman earlier this year, which, I never thought I'd do those sort of longer distance triathlons. I just didn't think it really mattered to me specifically. I think doing Comrades, the 100th year anniversary, they've had the anniversary like of the first Comrades, but the 100th year running, which I think is now 2025. I think it moved.
Yeah, it's a few years off still. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. And so I'd like to do that. I would like to get fast again, and I haven't been for the last few years, which, for better or worse, a bit of injury, a bit of lockdown, a bit of everything, it's going to stop me from doing that. I was signed up to do Chicago just a few weeks ago, and I had to can it because I was injured, and to be honest, it just cost too much to fly over there. So I put a pin in that until next year. So I've kind of entered for next year, but I've done 80. I'm going to say it's 84. It's somewhere there. Official marathons. Some of those don't get counted because they were like the Great Ocean Road,
45 or
45K, so it's not 42.2. And Canberra Marathon, I did the 50 a few times after running the 42 kind of part. That's a little kind of weird for me. I want to hit 100. I want to join the 100 club. Like, I think runners are box tickers by nature. We just the next box and move on to the next cool thing and tick that box and go on to the next thing. And so I'd like to do that. But I don't have a specific drive to do anything major, and maybe it's just a time of life thing. My kids are 6 and 7. I'm more probably in a space to support them and love them and be around for them than go off and have an adventure without them, But I have been trying to convince my wife we should move to the Netherlands next year. And if I could, look, I'm putting this out in public podcast right now, but if that's something I could pull off, I'd like to go and travel around Europe and just pump out races for a while.
Wow. Yeah. You'd have so many cool races on your doorstep there, I would imagine.
Totally. Tons. Yeah. Every time I go to Europe, I just look at what's available and just go run one anyway. So
yeah. No, it sounds amazing. Tristan, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but you know, it just, as I said, it's inspirational just listening to you. I could probably sit here and talk to you the whole afternoon, but I know we've probably got other things we need to get back to.
Yeah.
So, but actually, I did want to say, because I've had the pleasure of meeting your wife, and I've seen you have two beautiful kids. Obviously, that's something that happened post 52 marathons, and and you also mentioned, which I truly believe in as well, is that your kids see what you do and take something from that. And you obviously set a great example for your kids as well, I would imagine.
Well, I picked the right girl because she is a lot more motivated than me to do fit things and do cool stuff all the time. She's a great cyclist, an amazing basketballer, incredible mum. And I met her at Tribal, that triathlon club way
Yeah,
back.
yeah.
And
Right.
we didn't really connect then. She waited until I was an international running superstar and then got interested in me. But I ran all the marathons around the world and got the girl as well, got the book deal, got the girl, got the kids
And
later,
all the money that came with all of that, right?
all the money, all the cash. Yeah. Took me a while, took me a while. 120 grand that year. And I sort of spent a few years on the speaking circuit, kind of trying to make it up. And now it's this cool thing, some schools, I do school talks still pretty regularly, especially in February and towards the end of the year and times like that. And there's a few schools that I've done 10 years in a row, 10 years showing up to the school to inspire the
Wow,
next round of year 12s. And I just think I mean, for me, that speaks volumes to A, the story's got legs. It's still interesting.
yeah. No, as
B,
I said, a few people who've heard your story, it sticks with them for sure.
yeah, yeah. And I just love that it's a story. We all thrive on stories, right? You listen to others and you learn from it and you want to do more because of it. But it's okay to create your own stories. And those stories are the ones that you do convey to your children, and you kind of get them to think a little bit differently to other people, because they're not just set in this standard mindset of go to school, get an education, get a job, go try to find the money to buy a house, all of that kind of stuff. It's like you need to start thinking a little bit more broadly about what you want from life. And as you know, Hilton, like there's only so much you'll get from your work life as an inspiration and an aspiration. You have to love your life. And
Yeah,
if you don't, you start to get really fatigued and really
yeah,
kind of, um, circumspect in a negative way about what you could have done in your past.
yeah.
But it never ends. That point never ends where you get to pivot and do a little bit more and do a little bit more. And I want to keep trying to be that person for my family. Hence, I'm trying to shake it up and go off to the Netherlands and
Yeah, no,
get into
it's a
Ironman.
yeah, no, it's a great way to live your life, I reckon, Tristan. And I think you're a great example of it. So as I said,
Oh, mate.
still a big inspiration, certainly to me. I'll be
Well,
thinking about you as I'm training comrades.
Well, you're not going to be training without me, mate. You already know that. So you've already hit me up and said, can we do a few of those long runs together? And I'll be absolutely, absolutely humbled to go on that journey
Yeah.
with you and participate in it and knock out a couple of those 50Kers. And I might stop at 50 when you go off and do 60. But
Yeah. Well, I don't know whether I am looking forward to it, but it will be a lot more pleasurable doing it with you. I know, Tristan.
absolutely. Well,
So
good luck
why
to
don't we
you and
just
your brother,
finish
mate.
off with a couple of quick questions for you. I wanted to ask you just who your favorite runner of all time is.
All time.
Yeah.
Oh,
So if you
goodness.
could pick one runner, you've mentioned Gabriel Selassie. Could be him, could be somewhere else. Who's
I mean, Rob De Castella's got to be pretty iconic. I mean, if you ever watched videos of Rob running back in the day, like he was a stomper. Like he was probably one of the gutsiest low form runners that ever existed. Like he just bashed his way
yeah,
through races, and he was a world record holder. At one
amazing,
stage, like
amazing.
that's to me that's incredible and speaks volumes to the fact that there's like if a country puts more resources, and resources being people, into running, then they'll get better results over time. Do you know what I mean? It's just natural. The more volume of people you put into it, the better they
Yeah,
get.
yeah,
So, the Kenyans obviously and the Ethiopians have a huge history of that because they've got so many people that tap into it. So genetics, absolutely, a huge factor in getting faster and getting close to that 2 hours. But I think the volume of people and the desire for people to get faster and get better at it. And we're actually going through a huge, spate of amazing runners coming through right now.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, Robinson, Ollie Hoare, all of these people who are kind of, long distance runners and middle distance runners and all that kind of stuff. Like it's insanely cool. And so I wouldn't say I've got a specific runner. I loved all the stories about, Zatopek and all that kind of stuff back in the day. Courtney DeWalter, the female runner from the States who's broken so many records around the world. Just recently ran the Marathon de Fou down in oh God, I'm going to forget the name of the island, Reunion Island. That was
Okay.
just 2 weeks ago, broke the record, just totally smashed it, came fourth overall. Let
Wow,
yeah, but there was 3 guys and her all within about an hour. The next girl was like 3 or 4 hours later. She's just a beast, but also really casual and fun and enjoys her running and just wants to be out there doing it. And I mean, we're just so lucky. There's a guy local to us, Dion Finicero. I mean, he holds the 50K record for Australia, and he's just a really down to earth, nice guy who actually just wants other people to run and enjoy
yeah,
running as
yeah,
much as he does.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I must say that's one thing that attracted me to running as well. It's the people that you meet along the way, and even as you say, the elite guys, they're all just out there to help other runners, which is great.
Yeah, just incredible. A great story. So many great stories, local, international. And for me, I've got a running group, and I love to hear their stories of improvement. And a couple of those will probably turn into absolute rock star runners, and I'll never be able to keep up with them. But it's pretty cool to participate in their journey. So
yeah. Actually, we didn't touch on that, and I won't keep you too much longer. But I know you have the Run Like Crazy running group, and doing obviously a bunch of good and fun stuff with that group, Tristan. So I'm looking forward to perhaps having a few runs as part of Comrades.
Yeah, no, I'm so lucky that there's 3 groups across Melbourne now. There's one in Elwood, which is actually just a couple of streets away, and one in South Yarra, which is the one I coach, and another one in Brunswick. And if people are looking for a running group, hit us up. It's pretty casual. It's pretty fun. We all just try to get together and kind of accompany each other while running.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of other great running groups across Melbourne. Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying ours is the be all and end all. There's a ton of them. And if anything, there's loads more have popped up nationwide because of COVID, where people started these journeys together, together. So I think that's sensational because the more people that run, the better for everyone.
So I know you've got a website, runlikecrazy.com. So I think you can pretty much access running groups. Your book is certainly on there if people are interested in reading the book, which is a fantastic read. It's available on there. So
indeed.
Tristan, we always finish off these little podcasts with a quote. So I was going to ask you whether you have a particular quote you would like to share. No pressure. I'm happy to share one if you don't have one, but we like to finish off with one.
It's all right. My quote that, my dad used to feed me quotes growing up. And the one that really stuck with me was expose yourself to the risk of success.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's a classic, right? And that's a business quote, really, if anything else. Like, it's not really related to running, but it's a life thing too.
Yeah.
Like if you expose yourself to hard stuff, you might just pull it off. And if you don't, you'll learn something.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if it doesn't work out. At least you could go and give it a go and see what happens.
Well, you've certainly done that. So I just want to say thank you for the time spent with us today, Tristan, and I'm really looking forward to getting in a few of those training runs with you.
Thanks so much. Good on you, Hill. Thanks.
See you. Thanks, Tristan. Bye.